So we're going to give a presentation on the building project update. Certainly tonight.
You started?
What's that?
Are you starting?
Oh, go ahead.
You got started?
Yep, go ahead.
Good. No, we're good. We did practice this. So we just wanted to start, and then I'll turn it over to you and you can introduce everybody. We're good. So we did want to kind of step back a little bit and make sure that everyone understood that this has been a very long journey with the high school project. I know sometimes with our public, if they haven't been tuning in, it looks like we just all of a sudden decided to look at the high school. So we kind of wanted to step back a little bit, and then I am going to turn it over to the experts. But we wanted to step back and kind of talk about the long journey that we've been on. So we started back in October of 2017 at our Buildings and Grounds Committee meeting. In 2017, and we started talking about the need to look at our buildings and also look at the debt structure surrounding being able to finance those buildings and that debt. So we have been working on this for approximately 4 years. So that first year we really looked at what needed to happen, and we started on the journey, and we went out for a request for proposal for a feasibility study to look at all of our facilities. And that time then we hired based on an RFP process, which the board and other folks in the district were involved in, we hired Beers and Hoffman as our architect to work on that feasibility study and then to help as we moved along. When we first started looking at things, we really kind of stepped back and said, what are our greatest needs? We did a couple projects along the way to make sure we kept our buildings up to date. Because as we know, whether it's our homes or our buildings, it's very important to keep things moving smoothly. It is less expensive to do things along the way. All of a sudden I'm talking, my mask is falling down, I apologize. And then we also looked at what was the greatest needs of our buildings. And we actually moved Susquehannock High School up to the forefront of our building projects because, again, based upon our research and everything we did, we didn't just say, oh, which was the building that we haven't looked at last. We looked at what was the greatest need. So we really started looking at Susquehannock at that point with the plan, long-term plan, to go out to bid last year. Again, when the pandemic hit, we kind of slowed down and we decided to wait a year. But every time we wait, there are costs associated with that. So we want to kind of walk through that. It's been a challenging process. I do want to thank Randy and Scott and all the professionals that worked on the project, because I can't stress enough how many challenges we've already had along the way. And we'll continue to have challenges, but it has been a very great project, and they're going to kind of walk through where we are tonight and what our recommendation is, because we're still in a challenging time. We want to really walk through and get input on the next steps of the project. So now I'm going to turn it over to Randy.
That's all right. Good evening. Thank you. So as Mrs. Green had mentioned, we've been working on this for about 4 years. Our design team consists of architects, engineers, construction managers, building administration, facility individuals, as well as legal counsel and bond counsel. So it's a pretty big team when you put together a project that we're looking to undertake. It's a detailed process, and part of the items that we need to work through include working with code officials and other authorities having jurisdiction, and we'll get into a little bit more of that as we go along. So let me walk you through our objectives for this evening. First, we're going to give you an update of the scope of the project. Mr. Shunk from Beers and Huffman will do that. We'll also review the results from our construction document estimate, and we'll remind you of the process that we have undertaken with keeping our project on or near budget, as well as we'll review value engineering and allowances and alternates, and I'll explain that as we get into that further. We'll also review our timelines and options that we're looking at and have explored, as well as Mrs. Green will provide information on the budget and financing. And then we will review the importance of a decision to stay on this schedule, and we'll explain that a little bit further, as well as we'll conclude with our recommendation and to emphasize where we're headed tonight in our presentation is our recommendation will be to advertise and go out to bid for the project. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Shunk to give us a update on the scope of the building project.
Okay, on the floor plans that you've seen before, no major space changes here. I just kind of overall a broad look of where we are with the building today and what's being proposed. Overall, we have at least 2 more full classrooms. We have an additional small group instruction room. There are over 9 classrooms that are much larger than currently sized. We have a larger band room, larger orchestra, larger cafeteria, and then we have a large assembly space that you don't have right now, is that common space in the middle. So that's kind of the big picture of where we are with what we end up with in this project with the large addition. Again, the addition is about 35% of the current building. We want to build the addition as the swing space. Then we renovate the second phase, renovate most of the building, the existing building that's going to remain. And then the last phase of the demo of the cafeteria and that portion of the building, and finishing out front and the parking, etc., that goes out front.
One of the things that designers also noted in the feasibility study, and one of the reasons that the high school came to the forefront of the projects is the aging mechanical systems and the need typically, or especially the HVAC system and the chiller system.
Yeah, and as a side note on that piece, even at this point, with all the new rooftop equipment we're putting on, we're already looking at that 2 of the units may not make it by the end of the project during construction. That 2 of the new units may go on the ground to start the project as soon as we can get them, just so that we don't lose the other units before it's ready to go.
And the board may recall that the high school is our only building without full dehumidification.
Right. The site plan, ooh, this read darker on the other images, but you kind of get a feel there of the drive coming up. The 50-space parking lot out front, as you drove in or you notice, is obviously under construction at this point. We're also working on the 20-some, or not, I'm sorry, that's 97 out front, and then it's 50 in back behind the press box. But again, this layout, the big picture item here is that we're creating a new lane for the buses to come in and stay behind the building at the athletic field and separate from the car traffic coming out front. As we talk about regulations and PennDOT, etc., we have approval going on for the bus lane on back, and we're going to be looking to simplify matters with PennDOT. We're actually proposing to keep the front driveway at this time as it is, and then as we go forward, if we do need to make some changes in, let's say, the middle school or elementary school project, we have an opportunity. But we feel the bus traffic to the back there is the critical piece, and we'll get a better feel if we need to spend any more money and time at the front entrance.
If you've been on campus in the last couple of weeks, especially after the big rainstorms, we've gotten comments that we're putting a swimming pool out front. I'm here to tell you that that's not true, and that is part of our stormwater management, and I can tell you that it's working great already.
Okay, I think our next plan. So a couple comments here as far as the building. So this is, again, a look close at the front elevation. We're going to talk about some of the value engineering and alternate items. One of the major items we're looking at is we have the carport drop-off out front. One of the alternates is to not provide that carport drop-off. So the lower image is a vision of what that would look like. So that's when we will be noting some of the alternates. This is one of them that you're seeing, the difference that would happen budget-wise if we can't afford to do all of those canopies.
Scott, how much does that, what amount of cost does the car, I want the carport. What amount of cost is the carport?
Right now, Site Logic, the construction manager, has estimated the value of this drop-off, and we can switch to the next slide, the bus drop-off in the back, about $650,000 for both of them.
Same price for both?
That total,
Together.
combination,
Oh.
yeah. In the bid, we will get that broken out because I think on the back for the bus drop-off, I think it still may be very important to get the drop-off on back. I think visually on the front side, I think the building looks strong without that. It's the function that may be most helpful in the back of the
Right,
building.
this is what, right.
Yeah.
Well, we have to work on that.
Well, and that's part, as we discussed here, by going out to bid, we're going to see actual numbers. And again, we know that there's general contractors very interested in the project. So even with everything going on in the economy, we're hoping that we can see some good numbers. And that may allow us to pick alternates that we want.
I know that you will.
So let me walk you through the process as we've kind of talked over the, last year or so about the project estimates. As you may recall, we do at least 3 estimates at various stages along the way, starting in schematic design, then getting into design development. As that project is being, more and more details are coming together, the team looks at these. You can see our estimates as we go along. At each time, that gives us a opportunity to look and see where we're at compared to our budget, and then make some decisions, sometimes difficult decisions. As you can see, as we got into the 3rd estimate, the construction document estimate, we were a little over 69 million. One of the things in today's environment with everything that's going on, we saw supply chain issues, we saw labor market concerns. You're hearing in the news issues about steel and paint and plywood and all these materials. So our design team is keeping a pulse on all of these issues to see how that affects our project. One of the things we did between August and September is we took that time to look at how we get this closer back within budget. What we did is we updated our construction estimate, and we're now at 65 million, a little over 65 million. That number is our maximum project cost within the Act 34. You may ask, how did we do it? $4 million is a lot of money. Certainly part of that process is value engineering and alternates. Value engineering is looking at different materials and methods and how you use that within your project. At your home, you may have decided to put a new driveway in. You may have looked at concrete or asphalt. Those are going to have 2 different asphalt paving. Those are going to have 2 different costs, as well as they're going to last differently. It's those types of decisions that we looked at on a large scale. Alternates are gives us the opportunity on bid day to know what certain materials or certain systems are going to cost us. So some of these alternates, which Mr. Shunk will elaborate a little bit, on bid day and thereafter, within a few days, we'll need to start making decisions, but we'll know what those costs are, and that can be a factor that will help us determine with that. So Scott, you want to elaborate on those a little bit?
Sure. We have a couple of things noted up here. Some of the cost savings that we looked at, we had some entrances. All of our entrances, we have canopies over them, so it protects things in the rain and snow, helps the maintenance guys out, so keeping those doorways clean. We simplified some of those, went to some prefab units that we do have on other parts of the building that we were designing. There were some things with some lighting scope in the canopies that we changed. So there are kind of a lot of those, in big picture, kind of smaller items there that we just really try to squeeze down and get value and bring the price down a little bit. Some of the alternates listed here, and I think we do have an alternate list coming up, but there's a second elevator we're proposing. There's one elevator connecting to all 3 levels, pretty close to where the elevator is now. But we also propose, because the building's expanding so far in this direction, to have an elevator a little closer to that common space next to the cafeteria. So that's an item that we are showing as an alternate that we can decide if it fits in the budget or not when we're done. Same thing, we just talked about some of these entrance canopies, as far as the drive-through canopies there at the high school, the front and back. The district admin area, we have a larger design canopy over this area that would cover the stairs a little bit more. Again, looking at those as potential alternates, so we would see those numbers. Another example we're listing there is auditorium seating. We're looking at redoing the floors, other things happening in the auditorium, but one of the items is, do we replace the seats or do we put the existing seats back in? So those are some of the examples of those items. There were some items that after we went through the list that we decided just are too much of a compromise. Earlier on, we were talking about a 4-classroom section of the building, and as we went further in the design, we really need that classroom count. The same thing's happening at the district admin corner. Those familiar with the stair in the back, it's a little bit narrow, and again, there is no official ADA access between the 2 floors of the district admin building without literally going across the high school, down the steps and across. So the other item to note was our favorite green tile in the corridor. We looked at numerous ways. One of the more economical ways was recoating with different types of paint. We tested some samples in the corridor. We even used some samples for durability that are used at hospitals and some that are used at prisons. But the look of it, because the painting kind of quickly shows all the imperfections of the original construction, it wasn't necessarily improving the look. So while that was an option we were looking at of, well, we could just paint this, that's whereas I think you've seen before in the material, we're using that smooth concrete block that will have a much nicer and durable finish. So those were a couple items as we looked at a lot of alternates too, that we said this is just going too far, and we wanted to get to that number without those.
So obviously we talked, about all alternates and value engineering. One of the possibilities, depending on where we are with budget, is the use of capital improvement plans moving forward. So obviously a goal for this major building project is to not do any significant renovations for the next 20 plus years. However, Mr. Shunk had mentioned if in the bid for this major building project we don't replace the auditorium seats, I do not believe those auditorium seats will be in a condition that we would like 20 years from now. So at some point between now and 20 years, we're going to have to replace those seats. But that's something we can do. It's not going to disturb a lot of that auditorium. One of the other things, this board knows, we do a lot of roofs or keep our roofs, in good shape. We may be able to do those in capital improvement projects versus putting them in the major building project. Now, we're going to evaluate that. We're going to see what those prices are to put it in this project, and we'll make those decisions at that time. So let me walk you through a couple options that we explored. Obviously, the first option there is to advertise and go out to bid for the high school project, and that's going to be our recommendation for tonight. But one of the other things we explored is waiting another year. You'll recall that we already waited or postponed 1 year off of our schedule. One of the things we looked at is postponing another year. With that, as we looked at postponing, we're having issues with our chillers at the high school. So if we would postpone, there are some greatest needs that would need to be done not only at the high school, but because the high school is first in 4 projects, it's also pushing back our other projects unless we start to do them at the same time. We were looking at that as well. So certainly some of the positives and negatives of continuing on our current timeline. Positives, responding to current infrastructure needs at the high school that are needed. Financial costs, which you'll hear from Mrs. Green, are extremely low. It can help make up some of the differences or some of the overages. She'll get into that later, as well as, what will the escalation cost be a year from now? Typically that rises. There's no guarantee that those costs are going to come down. As well as just keep, a positive is just keep it moving forward. Because our buildings, all of them obviously are aging. Some negatives, certainly the supply chain concerns. That's something that we're going to keep a pulse on, obviously work closely with our contractors. It's vital that, they can get their materials when needed. And also another negative, just the, budget elevated, if we wait, a negative, if we, back up a second, we stay on the current timeline, a negative it would be the budget elevated due to the environment that we're in currently. And it's no surprise there's a labor shortage. So that certainly goes into construction as well. So we also looked at holding for a year. Some positives, will the supply chain stabilize? Will the labor market stabilize? Some negatives would be those aging buildings, the infrastructure, pushing back our long-term program. Financing costs probably won't be any better than they are now, and also what will that escalation cost be? Other options, or sub-options maybe I call it, if we decide not to move forward with this major building project at this time, we need to look at other greatest needs then. Some of our infrastructure is not going to last, so that we would need to start looking at some other projects as well. We're also, one of the things we want to look at is, because we're planning 4 of our 5 buildings, we need to start looking at maybe doing some concurrent construction. Anybody that was around here in 2000, 99 and 2000 will recall we did do that. I won't recommend it. I was here, we did Southern Elementary and Southern Middle at the same time. And my mask was off, you'd see the gray hair, and, but we can do it. We've done it, and we can do it if we need to. But the most desired would not to not do it. But we'll make those decisions as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Green.
So a couple things to highlight on the options as Mr. Buffington was going over them. I do want to emphasize that one of the things with our project that I want to give huge credit to both Mr. Buffington and Mr. Schonk on is the timing of our project. And we'll talk about the timeline in a little bit, but one of the benefits is, and one of the reasons why we feel we can move forward is they have, not we, I'm not part of that, they have designed it in a way that there is a long lead time for the contractors to get the product before we would start the actual construction, and that's critical. So I know there will be questions, and I know people are thinking, well, can we wait a month or wait 2 months or 3 months? But we really do feel that long lead time is very important. So we'll talk more about that at the end, but I wanted to bring that up as he was going over the pros and cons of each piece. So our long-term building renovation plan, as I said, we started 4 years ago, and we worked really to look at phasing in millage with the idea that we wanted to slowly and gradually phase in the tax impact. It does a couple things. It puts some cash back, just like at home. The less money you have to borrow, the less it costs, but it also phases in so it's not a huge impact in any given year. So we've already phased in millage, a $0.5 mil in place for the high school. All of our projects in totality that we were talking about for all of the 4 remaining buildings total approximately $133 million. So right now we would need approximately 0.27 mils per year until 2029 to complete all the projects. So that is a slow and gradual phase in. It is not a huge impact to any given year. So that's really what we're looking at, and that's that long range planning that we were talking about. Thanks. So also, as Mr. Buffington had pointed out, we are in an extremely good financing place at this time. The interest rates are very, very low. Now, I'm not going to say they're going to be higher next year, but I can almost guarantee they're probably not going to be lower next year. So, just think about if you are buying a home or a car right now. There's two things that you need to look at unless you have cash for the entire thing laying around. You have to look at both the cost of the house or the car, or in our case, the building project, and you also have to look at what your financing costs are. So many times, if not always, as your financing costs go down, most times your cost of the product goes up. And you have to look at both pieces because in total, that's what you're going to pay. So when we're looking at this, we are a little concerned about the escalated costs, but we also know that the financing costs are very low right now. So to put it in perspective, this is about a $65 million project. But on the first $10 million borrowing at this time, we would save about $2.3 million over the life of that bond, over what the average rates are during that time. So the rates are that much lower, I guess, is what I'm trying to point out. It is a significant amount of money, and that's just for the first $10 million borrowing. So again, if those rates stay low, it is important that we consider taking advantage of that, because that will help us in the long run and save the taxpayers in the long run. So we think that's very important. But I also want to point out, as Mr. Buffington said, we are recommending that tonight that we go out to bid to make sure we can see what the costs are. In no way are we saying that we want to issue bonds or money or anything until we know what those costs are. So this is really asking to go out to bid, see what those costs are, move forward with starting the process of the bonds, but not expending any money on them until we know what those bids are coming back. So that sale for the bonds will be after the bids are approved. So again, as I talked about, we have those two components of costs and financing. Our maximum budget for the project is $65.7 million per Act 34. So we had the Act 34 hearing, seems like forever ago, but before COVID. And that was our maximum building cost. We are within that cost on the estimate. It is about $1 million over our design development budget that Randy talked about earlier. But again, we are looking at both pieces of this, but we want to be transparent that we are about $1 million up from that design development cost. When we bring bids in, we will look at all of those and we will evaluate the bids and the alternates and make recommendation based upon priority. So really, we're going to bring in the bids, we're going to look at the base bid, but then we're going to also have to take each of the alternates, prioritize those, and then bring recommendations forth on, as Mrs. Fisher pointed out, the canopies and some of the other items. I do want to say that all of these alternates are beneficial alternates. This is not a Taj Mahal building. This is not anything over the top. These are all needed things, so I just want to point that out. But again, just like at home, we have difficult decisions we have to make. We believe that the project we're bringing forward is a great project and everything we need, and as we talked about, there were certain things that weren't going to get cut out. And I also want to point out, when I say we, I want to include the high school folks over there too, because they were part of all of those discussions as we walked through things.
I want to point out our estimate, the design team, it's a conservative estimate. So we believe that we will be under that. It's been estimated that way. There's no guarantee until we open up those bids, but we do believe we'll come under those numbers. So if we look at our timeline, and where we're at, we talked about our construction design estimate, and what we're asking tonight to do is put this project out to bid, authorize us to proceed with the bond issue. And as you can see, as we walk through the schedule there, we're looking at scheduling a special meeting on November 4th. One of the things that we're looking to do in order to get really good bids, we have to give the contractors ample time to bid the projects. So a lot of our other projects we bring back within a month. This project is so big that we need to give them longer time. But then we also balance that with the bond sales. So we all don't like to come out to another meeting, but as we're looking, it may benefit us to do that, as we balance bringing in bids and also the bonds. And then you can see the bond sale would happen at the regular scheduled November meeting with a closing by the end of the year. Construction, we're looking.
Let me clarify that a second.
Sure.
So at that November 4th meeting, if we have bids that we're bringing forward to recommend, we would also recommend that we move forward and do a parameters resolution for sale of the bonds that evening. And that's critical because what we're being told by our financial advisors is that we really want the bonds to be out on the market and for sale prior to the week of Thanksgiving. Once you hit the week of Thanksgiving and forward to the end of the year, there's a huge demand. So as you know, you want to stay out of those peaks of huge demand because that pushes rates up. So we want to keep those rates down. So we really want to get those bonds out to sale before that week of Thanksgiving. By approving it at the November 4th meeting, that allows us to approve that parameters resolution after we know we have good bids, and then we can proceed with the sale. And we won't need another board meeting after that. We do the parameters resolution to enable us to do that.
And if bids come in well and we elect to move forward, we're looking at breaking ground in March. However, one of the early parts of the project that we need to do is move the office out of its current location because it's sitting where the new addition is going to be built. So we would actually do that a little bit ahead of breaking ground in January. So as we said already, we've gathered professional opinions from construction manager, architect, legal counsel, bond counsel, contractors, to help formulate an opinion on what to do with our project. And it is our recommendation that we advertise and go out to bid for the high school project and move forward with the financing as we see the results of the bid. Just a couple other things to point out. It's important to understand, the bid environment and the bond market. It's a higher risk than normal in the bid environment, but it's an exceptional bond market. So it's important to understand that, as well as we will expend some costs to advertise and bid, but as we open up those bids, if they're favorable, we'll most likely recommend moving forward. If they're not favorable, we'll come back with more recommendations on where we go from there. Any questions?
Any questions? Any board members? Yes, Bruce.
Of course. In the $65 million, how much, I assume there's some contingency in there. How much contingency?
Yeah, there's a couple million of contingency.
A couple million?
We have both design contingency and then also for change orders.
Okay. The alternates, I'm correct, we either have to accept or reject them when the bids are open.
Yeah, typically, and when we accept the bids, so we'd come with recommendations with accepting bids with certain alternates, either accepted or not.
Are there any of those alternates that stick out in your mind as being very difficult or impossible to do later?
Certainly some of the, like the canopies, you can do later, but you're going to be jacking up, you're going to be tearing up some concrete to do that, to create the footings. Certainly the other thing is there's lighting within those canopies, so running that conduit and things, not impossible, but there is some, I'll call rework with that. I don't know, Scott, is there anything to add there? Kind of.
If you have a look at this, I know the second elevator would be
That's
very
the one,
important. We'd be going back into an existing building, so we'd dig a trench, and that would be probably one of the more expensive items to do is come back and put an elevator in. But when we look at, when the numbers come in, we can help make that evaluation of this may be easier to do later, or, again, when we see those numbers, but that's a great question of how hard it is to do something later.
On the canopy then, is there any merit before concrete is poured to do some preliminary work, to run the wires and have it ready to install the canopy at some point, but not buy the canopy as part of construction?
Could be. I mean, you could potentially do footings, but, then you're spending money, and if we never do the canopies, it's kind of a balance there. But yes, certainly.
Okay, and the only other question I have is, the presentation was extremely thorough, and thank you, I really appreciate that. But one thing we haven't addressed is enrollment, and where enrollment is going, and how these additions are being driven by enrollment, or are we covered for what we think may happen to enrollment with the development that's going on in the district?
Yeah, I'll let Mrs. Green and Mr. Shunk talk a little bit more about that, but certainly this project is being more driven by our infrastructure and not enrollment. But if you want to add to that a little bit.
So I did pull our enrollment from about 2015 for the high school to current, and I actually was surprised at how stable at the high school level it was. And I left my paper over there, so I'm going off the top of my head right now. I think in 2015 it was 933, then 2019 before COVID hit about 950, and then somewhere in that between 20 and 21 right now, it was very stable around that. I think it was like the 940. So we're between 930 and 950 the entire time frame. So as Mr. Buffington said, I don't think it's really driven. But to answer your question, Mr. Baumann, I believe the building capacity is over 1,300 for.
Yes.
Yeah, we're designing, at least for 1,200, when we look at some FTE some state PDE numbers, we're about 1,315 to 1,370. So again, some of that's going to be classroom sizing and how much utilized we are using all the classrooms, and there could be adjustments. We had that discussion of if we can have up to another 300 plus students in this building, how far do you go with that? And I think part of the discussion was going, if you have that much growth in these grades, you're also having that growth potentially throughout the district. So at that point, if all of a sudden we're up by 30-some% in this building, it probably means you're 30% elsewhere. We're probably having issues in other buildings that we may look at, is that when you start looking at an intermediate building or something, looking at moving classes around and things like that, and not just continuing to build additions in all the buildings.
I think one of the things maybe to emphasize, certainly we have some more classrooms than what we did, but one of the things I want to emphasize is the quality of our classrooms. One of the things that we looked at hard with the building principal team was the size of those classrooms. So we've improved the size of many classrooms.
And one other note is we already have designed structurally in the building the library space that is 2 stories. If you recall from that image off the common area, in that ceiling space in the second floor, the 2 side sections could actually be framed out to become 2 more classrooms. So the structure is there that we can add 2 classrooms within the building rather economically if that's something you would need down the road.
A little bit like your canopy example or asking, we have that set up really for 2 classrooms.
So I think to answer your question in summary, I think we feel there's sufficient capacity for growth in the community, because again, we do have a lot of potential growth in our community with the open land. So we think there's sufficient growth. The other thing that we do feel very strongly is the large common areas like cafeteria, auditorium, those types of spaces, that we have sufficient room for growth in those areas.
As well as the added common area. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I'd like to put a motion on the floor authorizing the administration to advertise and go out for bid for the Susquehannock High School building project. I think this is something that we have to do.
Second.
We have a second.
Second.
Are there any questions, comments? Are there any nays or exemptions? Being none, the motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great
Very good
presentation.
presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.